Welcome to the second MyData webinar, focusing today on the design aspects of human-centric personal data, data protection and privacy. My name is Schep. I serve as the community lead for MyData Global, and I will be hosting and moderating today's call. And regardless of whether you're a newbie or a long-time friend of MyData, these webinars can really give a good chance to dive into the various important topics that are important for MyData, as well as to learn about different ongoing initiatives, projects, services, developments that are relevant to MyData Global's purpose and fill a role in making MyData's vision happen. Few words about MyData also to those who have just found this webinar and MyData. MyData is an alternative vision. It's a series of principles as well as a movement. And the core idea is really that you and I should have an easy way to see where data about us goes, specify who can use it, and alter these decisions over time. We believe that to make this change happen in the world, we need to actually have three big shifts. First one is from formal to actionable rights. Then we need to also move from data protection to actually data empowerment. And finally, to move from closed to open ecosystems. These are all big topics of itself, and they are further explained in the MyData declaration that we have I put up in the MyData website. So I encourage you to also go and browse this through and read and give feedback to us. MyData movement is steered by MyData Global, whose main purpose is to empower individuals by improving their right to self-determination regarding their personal data. And we don't do this alone ourselves, but rather together with different stakeholders from across business, legal, technical, and societal sectors that make up together the MyData community. And like I already said, these webinars are also the space and time where to introduce the work related to human-centric personal data. So we have today here Estelle, Hary, and Regis Chatellier from the Innovation and Foresight Lab of French Data Protection Authority, who will be presenting their work on investigating the role of UX and UI design in data protection. And secondly, there is Tijmen, Schep, a technology critic and privacy designer, who presents the privacy label, which is a communication tool to provide clear, transparent, and multi-layered privacy information to people. The flow of the webinar will go like this, that both Estelle and Tijmen take approximately 15 to 20 minutes to have their presentation. And then we take few questions after each presentation and follow up with a short discussion in the end, more generally about today's topic. Before I go ahead and give the word to our presenters, few also practical notions or good reminders. It's good to keep yourself muted when you're not speaking, so we don't disturb the speakers or the webinar. And also that this webinar is being recorded, so we can share this webinar also with others who are unavailable to attend today. So if you wouldn't like to actually voice out your comments or questions in the end of the webinar, then I encourage you to make good use of the Zoom chat during the call to leave your comments and questions there, and I can take them up during the discussion myself. All right, so I will pass the ball then to Estelle. She will also share her screen, and we're good to go with the first presentation.
I start?
All right, Regis will start.
Not Estelle, but Regis, because we are two for the presentation.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, I'm Regis Chatelier. With Estelle, we are part of the Data Protection Authority in France, the CNIL. And specifically, we are part of the Linc, which is a laboratory of innovation at the CNIL. And the idea is that we are like a laboratory with three missions. The first one would be to, if Estelle can change we are not at the same place, if can change. Well, the first one is to explore. We open foresight articles and studies to participate in data ethics debate. We also discuss, we are like a touching point with a digital innovation ecosystem and experimenting, because at the CNIL we have a lot of lawyers, we have many tech crew with some engineers, some PhD in cryptography and so on. And the idea is to run our own projects, and we try to focus on all the topic of privacy, but not only from the legal part. And regarding the exploration, we at the Innovation and Foresight team, we publish every 1 or 1.5 years some reports in which we try to explore data protection challenges and on many different topics. And the idea for us is to find some new some new topics, and to understand how the stakeholders are dealing with the topic, and to make some recommendations. The last two were just about around the smart city, and the last one about around the design. And it's called in English Shaping Choices. You can find it online if you want in English. The idea for us in this topic was to explore the link between data protection and interaction design, interface and data protection, because we thought that the interface is the first object of mediation between the law, rights, and individuals. And as you may know, the design is in the GDPR as Article 25 as privacy by design, but we thought that the Article 25 was not delegated to the designer, but to the lawyer. And we thought that it could be interesting to explore the privacy design and not the privacy by design. And in this idea, we first explored the data, the attention economy, because we thought that in the data, the attention economies have used many patterns and dark patterns to influence the people to stay more on the platform, or to buy more on with many a lot of literature on cognitive bias and the way the people use it. And for us, it was interesting to explore it, because we think that it has become more like soft power, and that's why today we can see that big platforms are sharing their design patterns, their design, the way they design their platform in many websites, because they know that as a soft power, it's more easy for them to share their design, to give it to around the world, so that any developer or any designer can use it. And the problem for us is that these big platforms have a business model based on the collection and the treatment on the advertisement, and they use a lot of data. And in this point, we thought that it could be interesting to just not to permit to the people to have access to new way of thinking the interface design. And in this way, our recommendation was on two parts. The first one was that, as I told you, at the CNIL and in general, so that data protection is more the business of the lawyers and the tech crew. But we saw that it would be interesting for us to have more designers with us. At the CNIL, we have Estelle for about 3 years now, but we know that we should tackle the subject of design much more than we do. It would be interesting to use the design of the interface to analyze some treatments, some companies, and sometimes to use the design just to tell if someone is okay with the GDPR or not. And that's one point. And the other one was that we should have to build and to share an open, a new way of thinking the design platform. And that's why we have published in January, in June, a platform which is called design.cnil.fr, because we think that designers are not the problem, but the solution. And we have now published this platform, which is dedicated to the designer, so that we can make them understand more what is the GDPR, why we need them to produce into new platforms. And that's why we have all this project with the platform, some workshops, and some use case we are going to share, both in French and English. And I let Estelle present more about the platform and how we deal with the chatbot in this case.
Thank you. So the platform, as Regis said, is really aimed to designers, because many designers don't really know much about law and GDPR in general. So actually one point that has not been mentioned is that we did some user research, let's say. So we surveyed designers, etc., to understand how they were considering GDPR in their practice on a daily basis. And there were a lot of points coming out of those interviews. One of them was that they didn't know much about it, and it seemed very, frightening somehow. And the other point was that they didn't have any leverage in comparison to other fields, such as lawyers or marketing, for example. So basically what we try to do with this platform is to give them some materials that they can draw from to let's say, to argue for their position in terms of how something should be designed and how it is designed in a way that is compliant, and that they can argue with the marketing department, for example, or the lawyer department, etc., the legal department, sorry. And this platform is designed around three main concepts or ideas. The first one is really to introduce three of the GDPR principles, which are information, consent, and the exercise of the right. So we've been focused on those because for us it seems the most where designers have the most work and potential to work on. The second idea around the platform is to also give case studies. So those case studies, we kind of co-create them with designers, because we're hosting a workshop quite regularly, like almost every month in Paris most of the time. And the last point is also we are really trying to build a community of designers that are concerned by the question of privacy and data protection, so that they can discuss between each other and basically share good practice between each other. So right now, I'm just going to speak about a bit more about the three GDPR concepts. So the first one is information. In the GDPR, information should be concise, transparent, understandable, easily accessible, clear, and simple. And most of the time, this is, it kind of corresponds to privacy policy. And what we want to ask in this platform somehow, and in the work that is made through this platform, is how can you inform people outside of privacy policy and, for example, within the user experience of a service. So this is just one of the questions we might ask around information. There might be a lot of others. The second principle is consent. We should be freely given, specific and ambiguous and informed. So, well, the last point comes back to the principle of information, of course. And then consent is, I mean, I think it's quite straightforward, this criteria. And the last point is the right. So it should be facilitated, guided, feedback should be given when someone exercises some rights, and the request should be tracked. So for explaining the different criteria for each of those principles, we've created some very simple examples that kind of illustrate how it could be implemented. So on the website, basically you have for each of the criteria 2 examples of what might be done. So both of those examples are legal and kind of comply with the GDPR. On the one on the left, you have maybe a very classical way of subscribing, like a subscribing interface, where basically you have a form and like at the bottom of it, you have the privacy policy that is written in a very, very tiny font, etc. And what we propose is that, okay, maybe we can rethink the way you bring information in this very peculiar case, where basically you bring the information each time the person enters a given information. So for example, when the person will enter our name, basically it would be explained why the name is needed and what it would be used for and how it would be processed. And so we do that also for the email and password, etc. And there is this kind of recap at the end that just kind of wrap everything up and also says, don't forget you have, like, for example, rights. So it's not, it's the idea here in this example is really to give an idea of what is possible around information. The second example, so this is for an unambiguous consent. So here we are on an interface that is a chatbot. And on the left side, basically, when the chatbot asks if the person, the user, want to share her email for advertisement from the partners, basically the chatbot at some point, like let's say some days after the request was asked to the person and the person didn't answer, it kind of activates per default this sharing. And so this is not unambiguous because the person didn't do any action to say, okay, I want to receive advertisement. So this is not really a good way to basically get consent for advertisements. And so on the other hand, the possible approach is that it's just to give the person and to wait for the person to say and to act with the interface to record her consent. And finally, for the exercise of the rights, so most of the time when you look for, I don't know, exercising the right of access or portability or whatsoever, so it really depends of the service. Some are more advanced and developed than others, but most of the time you just end up with an email that just tells you, okay, you can send an email to the DPO and your request will be processed at some point. The problem is most people don't know what are their rights and don't know how to express themselves when they want to just know what kind of data the data processor has on them, etc. So a possible approach would be to really guide the person and give her information when she wants to access her data whatsoever. So here, for example, on the interface on the left, you have a very simple way to use your access right, and you just have to enter your email address and just send your request, and it's kind of automatized for on the side of the data controller. So I think, I mean, I'm I'm soon finished. I would just like to say that I said at the beginning that we are really trying to work with other designers to kind of co-create, let's say, good practices and potentially also data protection design patterns. So how we do it? So basically, we are trying to open as often as we can space for people to discuss. So we host every month workshops where basically we have a group of designers, lawyers, technologists that come together, and we give them a challenge somehow to solve. And for 3 to 4 hours, they have to propose a way to better inform the person in a very particular user moment, etc., etc. The second point is, from this workshop, everything that is created by the participants, we take it with us and we are trying to rework it to make it more finalized, if I can say, and we create case studies from that. And so those case studies, we will publish some of them quite soon. Unfortunately, it would be in French first and then in English, but basically all the content we create, we are always translating it in English at some point. And finally, we think it's really important that, I would say, to spread the practice and the way of thinking about data protection and privacy. So everything that we're using to host the workshops, all the methods, all the tools, etc., we publish them in an open source format, and it will be also available on the platform design.cnil.fr. And I'm done. So thank you for being here today. And if you want to join us, we also have a Slack channel. The address is on the slide. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Estelle and Regis, for this presentation. It seems like a really great resource for learning and getting more insights of how to design better, better interfaces, better services, and so. Before going ahead, I would open this up for also asking any questions or comments. What you heard from Estelle and Regis, is there? Or what are your comments and questions? I will then comment it also here. So yeah, Adrian is commenting. Somebody. All right. That can you ever fix dark patterns as long as all of the designers are working for someone other than individuals? We need to get rid of the platforms and replace them with APIs. Designers will then work for us as individuals. Regis and Estelle, what are your thoughts on that?
I don't know if we can get rid of the platform and replace them with API, but our point is that as the designers are working in organization, not only platforms, our point is that we have to empower them so that they can be a real ability to change the views of their companies, because in our study we have we know that the designers are more or less at the end of the process, and they are between the marketing and the legal part, and they don't have much power around how should they produce better interfaces. And as data protection authority, since we have the ability to sanction the platform and see if us have this platform telling the people, telling the world that the design is important, we think that maybe they can have much more power than they have at this point in the process. That's not making the platform API, but it's a first start, I think. And that's why we think it's, at this point, it's what we can do with the design. Maybe Estelle has more.
Not really. Well, not really, to be honest. I'm sorry.
There's also another question in the Zoom chat. How are you planning to expand this set of GDPR design patterns further?
We are trying to do with as much as we can, but the idea is to expand all we produce in our platform and to share it, because we are just trying to start the process, and we don't want to be the gatekeeper of what would be some good design in the GDPR, but just to share the process and how people could use our tools to produce different design patterns. And that's why it's like we want to share with the people not only our use cases, but also the tools to create their own use cases. And that's why we think that we are only at the CNIL so 2, 3, 4 people sometimes to work on the topics, but not all the time. And that's why it's much more the process that is interesting more than only what we can produce by ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions from the audience? I'll use my chance as well then, just one question. You mentioned that this platform is actually directed to designers, and you mentioned that many designers actually don't have either the skills, know-how, or have had the chance to actually look into that. So these are really, really great resources. Now, thinking this even further, when small companies, NGOs don't even have designers in the organization to work on those issues. How can, or what is the most, or maybe like the first steps even to start from, to start designing better interfaces for their own work and for their own organizations? Are those tools, is this even further possible to simplify that it's easier also for anybody in the NGO field, for example, to take up?
I don't know if I have an answer. Maybe Estelle has an answer, but we know that in different, that when we thought that it would be interesting to have our own platform or to create like a movement around the design, that these days when people in NGOs try to develop and design their own website, they will use what they can find in on the web, on, I don't know, the different, what they can find in the website produced by Google or by any other other big platforms. And if we can make it possible for them to use different patterns, it could be a good way for them to have the ability to participate in the process. But at the same time, we have to start with the designers, and then we can produce some good patterns that can be reused. We are like at the beginning of the process. And but when the idea that we have also the workshops, and the workshops are not only dedicated to the designers. The idea is that in every workshop we have designers, we have product owners, we have lawyers, or anyone interested in the topic. And we think that thinking on the design, interface design, is not only the job of designers. And that's why we think that all the process can be useful for anyone. We hope so.
Mm-hmm. Great. And thank you for making those resources available for others to learn from those. All right, let's then move further also to Tijmen for his presentation on the work on privacy label.
Okay, I think you should now be able to see my messy desktop, and we go into the presentation. All right, I hope you can all see this. So hello everyone, my name is Tijmen Schep. I'm a technology critic and a privacy designer from Amsterdam. I'm working on a lot of projects in the field of privacy, and this is one of them that I'll be discussing. It's a project that's been developed together with support of a lot of organizations, so it's not just me. So it's ECP, the Platform for the Information Society, a SurfNet, privacy company, which I work very closely with, which is a large privacy services provider in the Netherlands, PineappleJazz, which is my own company, and the SCDN Funds, which is a big important fund for cultural and development around internet issues that's supported by the Dutch domain name registry. So I'm also a little bit about me. So I've written a book about privacy design a long time ago in 2016, and that was because I've taught on the subject, and a lot of my students, I want to help them better. And from that also developed another project that I've recently launched at Dutch Design Week, like last week, which is called Candle, and that's a privacy-friendly smart home system. So that's just a bit of a side note, but that's a project that's getting some interest right now, because we, in a group of Amsterdam-based designers and privacy experts, wanted to show that you could combine privacy friendliness and ease of use in one product. You don't have to choose between privacy and convenience, as is often said. So from a strict privacy design standpoint, we want to make a point. You can do this. So that's one thing. Here's a different version. So this is by Jesse Howard, which is a product designer. This is one by Dini Besem. She's a jeweler. This is a CO2 sensor, for example. And well, it's a long story, which I won't get into, but I think it's interesting to look into. But so back to the privacy label. So privacy label, I'm giving you guys a bit of a sneak peek here. Because it's right now, it's in the beta phase, and we're testing it with a lot of organizations, and it will be launched in next year. So this is really a sneak peek, and I want to start with this question. Which is longer, Shakespeare's play Much Ado About Nothing, or the iTunes terms and service one? I'm sure a lot of you will think, it must be the Apple terms and service, but actually it's not, but it is very close. So it's really crazy long. And of course, that leads to the problem of, who reads these things? Who reads these privacy policies? Nobody really does. Can I move this thing away? Yes, great. So I think we can do better, and I think we should do better. I think that's a challenge, and I think it's a thing where design can play a role. Right? Design can play a role in making these privacy policies better, because of course right now these privacy policies are not really made for the users. They're made for other lawyers, so that they can say, well, we said nothing would read the whole thing, lawyer, and then you'll find that we really covered ourselves. But they're not designed for normal people. And I think that's what normal people also intuitively get, right? Like, this is not really for me. I don't have to read this. So also the EU recognized this, right? They made this point in the GDPR to say, well, we want to reserve the option to add icons at some stage. Icons that better explain to normal people in a simplified way what the issues are and what they should be aware of. Of course, their icons were pretty horrible. Oh, also, by the way, the icons should be machine readable, and none of us are really sure what that means, but we've got some ideas on that as well. Anyway, so icons, right? So that's where we started, and then the ECP, the Platform for the Information Society here in the Netherlands, they asked us, well, can you design something new? Try it, make something better. So we're like, yes, we're working on this. Yes, let's do this. So let's get into that. So the first question we started to ask was, what do we need? And I'll go into a little bit of the history on that process. Then I'll show you in the demo what we made. And then I'll go a little bit into what this could be, like if we go further with linked open privacy, which is a form of linked open data. And then I'll in 2 slides go into our plans for the future. So let's start with the question, like, what do we need? What would a privacy label look like? And there are a lot of things. I love icons already, and really a lot. And new icons are popping up. And I think when we started designing this, we had to deal with some questions of how would our icon communicate? I think the fundamental question is, are you trying to be factual or judgmental, right? So an icon could be informative, or it could be have some kind of norm or value attached to it, saying, well, this is good or bad. And then, for example, there could be a third-party agency that gives out that label, right? So we all know these things. So where on that axis do we want to be? So, for example, you could imagine some kind of government agency that it has an approved stamp for products, and then people could recognize that. No, I think if we're being really honest, we could even get something like this, where we get like warning labels on data products to say, well, you know, this may damage your job prospects. So that's one axis. Another axis is, do we want this thing to be voluntary or enforced? So that's very much related to the first question as well. Like, do we want organizations, for example, companies and other organizations, do we want them to do this, embrace this and think, hey, this is a good idea? Or do we want to have some kind of agency that says, you have to do this, this is now the law? So that's another question. So we could imagine something like, you know, what we have for washing machines, but for data, right? Say, well, you know, how good is it? How bad is it? And a little bit of informative in this suggestion, but, you know, like an EU kind of thing. In the end, those questions, I'll get into those in a bit, but actually, yeah, we decided very clearly that we wanted to inform and that we wanted to be neutral. But before that, I want to during this whole phase of discussing this and thinking about this, we kind of realized something important, which is that icons really weren't enough. Like, icons are having a hard time to communicate any of this stuff if we want to inform people. And that's why we realized that we should do something else in icons. We should make a template. And there we were very much informed by what's happening in America, where there is some kind of standard for banks, for example, where they don't so much have to show an icon, but they have to answer a number of questions which explain to normal people what they're doing. So, you know, very easy to understand questions with relatively easy to understand answers. And there's a whole standard on that. And we like this idea, so then we realized, oh, we should go way further than a label, than an icon. We should make a label. And then, of course, with us, it became more of like, where do we want to be in that whole spectrum? Well, we thought we want to be informative and not judgmental, and make it voluntary, so that organizations can themselves, for now, just say, hey, I want to better inform people about these things. We believe that a lot of organizations do want that, and so we wanted to make something that helps them. And in a way, what we wanted was something that was like a summary of their privacy statement, something that could do that, and that could just, in a glance, you know, if you're interested in that, you could see it. So informative and voluntary, that's where we ended up. So what did we make? Well, this is a short summary of a privacy statement, as you could say. So it has a number of parts, and I think this is a good point for me to go into a demo of that. Just jump out and see if that works. Can I do that? Here. Yeah. So dumping here. Here. No, no, here. No, here. Where's my thing? No. Okay, well, let me just go to privacy.org. Lost my tab there. Here's a website. Quick view of that, and then we go explore the prototype. There we go. Okay, so here we are at a prototype label. And there's a number of things I can show you here. So first off, let's just look at the label itself, the contents of it. Basically, it has a left side and a right side. So the left side is what we call the data river, which is about how data is collected, how it's used, and then how it's shared again out to the rest of the world. Let me change the style there, because I can do that easily. Why not? So that's one of the things as well. Like, the label has been made in such a way that you can easily embed it in your own website, and it will take the style of your own website. So we don't say you have to have a certain style to the label. You can always use for your own website, your own style. But you do have to answer these basic questions, these basic things. So here's the label. So here you see. Let's go through it. So collected data is about explain to people what you gather about people, what you collect. So what you receive from them personally, but also what you may receive from others, what you observe, data you may create, like inferred and derived data, which is very important to us, and purchase. So these are, after a lot of talks with experts and field, we thought these are things that we, for the coming period, want to explain to people that this is something they should care about. And then you can see always, you know, is it what kind of data they collect? So is it aggregated? Is it sensitive? Is it special category? So and even that can still be a bit complex, but then you can always find out more on the website And also the companies themselves can give a little bit of details about what they're doing. And then on the right of that, you can see more details on it. So what do you collect, and then where is that stored or processed? So is it outside EU or not? I think that's the first important thing. To what degree does it leave the EU? Does it leave those protections? And how long is it stored? And then just like with the ingredient list, you can see that it's all about this list of where things that happen the most are at the top. So in this case, most data is stored for more than 10 years, which is pretty extreme, but it's an example. And then some less than 1 year. So it's always the same 4 things, but they can be in a different order depending on the duration. Then there's the question of how is data used. So then there's a finite list of things that organizations can select from, like human resources, providing goods and services. So these are a standardized list we try to make. And then you can also say whether or not you make use of automated decision making, which is important because that's something that you have to inform people about. And then on the right, you see something related to that again, which goes in depth. So that's in this case the legal basis. So what are your legal basis for doing all this? Then there's the question of data sharing. So how does data leave the organization? So you can say we share it with, etc. And then again, this is an ending list you select from, and then you can put the things you do the most at the top and things you do the least at the bottom. And finally, there's a little a thing there where you can say, well, what can I do to take action as a consumer or citizen to, if I don't like that, where do I go? So that's in a nutshell what the label is. And then, as I said, you can change the style in any way that you want. And also because we use all these things like finite lists that you select from, it also makes it easily translatable. So I can just immediately get a Dutch translation because everything at the service level is universal, as it were. So that's, I think, something that will help a lot of organizations to just make one label and then have them in all the European languages. And then, of course, you can hit the embed option, and then you can copy it into your own HTML. Let me go back to the slides. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so here you see this idea of the river and the usage, and you can find all this on our website as well. And here you see, for example, you could copy the label into a Google website and see how it looks there. Originally, we had a version that was a bit wider like this, but then we moved it to this more vertical friendly version. Yeah, so here's the Google version. So we did have some challenges here, and I think one of the interesting things that we wanted to make it future-proof. So this was very much where the philosophical and sociological knowledge in the team really helped a lot. And to figure out like what are the things that we should care about, and how do we communicate those? For example, like this long-term shift where we're moving from an information society to a reputation society. I think that's something that is interesting because this talks about these things like in China, the social credit system, where it's not so much about information anymore, but about quantifying people's social value, social credit, social capital, and I think that's something that is an aspect of all this data use that people don't really understand yet. They think very much still in very basic terms about these things. I think they have to understand better, and then slowly you're starting to understand the role of data brokers in this, where their data is then taken and transformed into all these scores that describe them, and then these scores are essentially what is sold. I think this distinction between raw data and derived data, I think, is something that people in public should be able to make better, and they don't yet. So there's a lot to learn there. For example, like this distinction between provided data, observed data, derived data, and inferred data. Whereas this great slide by Martin Abrams explains, these that we need to be able to discern these types of data before we can really be informed about data, about what is happening. I think that's something that we try to incorporate into the label, like anticipate how this knowledge will be arriving in the wider audience, how they will start to slowly understand these things, and the label is trying to anticipate to be ready for those things. So this is just one example with the top left corner about how your data is collected. But so there's a lot of theory into the label and a lot of thinking about like what is the world going to look like in 5 years, and then what will people care about. So also in the label you see a lot of things like we wanted to make it voluntary and accessible for companies. we don't really want to be bashing them at all. So there's a certain pragmatic vagueness in the things where we say most data is stored for this long, a little bit is like that. So that's purposely done because just as you take a food label, an ingredients list on a food package, you'll find that the things that are most in the package, like sugar, for example, will be at the top, but it doesn't say exactly how much. It just says it's mostly sugar, and then it's that. So we thought this vagueness was good, also because that means you don't have to update your label every 2 seconds. But we had some purposeful, pragmatic vagueness there. There's also 2 implementations levels, which I won't really go into right now very much. But if you try to make a label on our site, which you can sign up now and make a label if you want, because we're right now in beta testing. You'll notice that there's something else which is called you can have a lot more data, data mapping. The data mapping is basically where you totally fill in all the types of data that you collect, and then the label is generated from that. So that's one of the things that we're working on very much now is how can existing software products that inventorize, that are like an inventory of which data you collect, how they can export to a privacy label. So that's a thing where if you want to, you can be very more detailed about it and share a lot more about the data you collect. As I said, you can also adapt the label to your company style. So again, that's saying we don't want to be too angry or judgmental. No, we care most about people actually implementing this and embracing it. But still, we also think it's very useful for consumers because it's if you use the privacy, the data mapping is very multi-leveled, so you can dive deeper if you want. Also, the whole label links to more details on the website that explain all these things to people. And of course, because it's web-based, you have a lot of modern functionality like search and data visualizations if you want, but it's all about the data mapping. So I should actually show you that. Do I have an example of that? Yeah, I think I removed it from the slides. Sure, sorry, I removed it from the demo, so that's really dumb. But I show you that. But anyway, there's an idea that one of our ideas is that if we make this label readable, machine readable, then we get to an interesting state where imagine if these labels link to other organizations that you work with, right? So that's if the label of the data mapping has something like, well, we work together with this company and that company, and we work together with this company called Cambridge Analytica, and then you might want to know. But if these labels would link to each other as a standard, then you could be able to find how your data moves over the network, over the internet, and over through companies. And we think that's not a strange idea because increasingly we see that organizations are actually willing to show and share which organizations they work with. So, and a lot of, especially in the nonprofit sector, that's very common now that people are very open about who they work with, who are their data processors. So that would allow, if they then also have a privacy label which also links to these organizations, then you could create a map of how data is flowing across the web. Finally, our plans, we're right now in the beta phase where we're testing this. We have tested it with a number of Dutch universities with help from SURF, and that's been really valuable. We've worked with a lot of privacy experts to really look at it. Like it was like an expert testing phase. Right now, we're moving towards a phase where we're testing it with normal consumers, like the end users. And with companies. So there are a lot of companies right now that are trying this out, and we're asking them for feedback, seeing how they like it, and if that helps them communicate better. And already we're getting a lot of positive feedback from these organizations where they're saying that this could really save them a lot of time to communicate things. For example, if they have a project where they're looking for new people to work at their company or organization, well, they might make a quick label for that to explain what's going on without getting into a huge detail. So yeah, we're very enthusiastic about it, and we'll be launching this next year. And then we should have ironed out all the last wrinkles, and then we're curious what people will do with it. So you're getting really a sneak preview on this. And if you're interested in trying it out and working with us in this beta phase, we're very open to that, and we'd love to talk to you. So that's my talk on the privacy label. I'm sorry for not showing you the data mapping of the privacy label. That's actually kind of, please, I'll enable that online, and then you can check it out if you want after this talk.
Thank you very much, Tijmen. All right. I see already some comments in the Zoom chat, but before also maybe somebody had want to voice out your comment or questions. I'll take the first one then from the Zoom chat. And there was a comment from somebody that said that this would make it hard to compare two vendors. What do you think about that?
Oh, that's actually, we hope that it will make it really easy to compare two vendors because it's so standardized and machine readable. So it hopefully makes it easy to say, we're trying not to be judgmental, right? We're trying not to say this is good or bad in that way. But of course, the side effect of using something like this, just as if you go to a supermarket and you look at two packages of butter, is that you can compare these things like approximately, right? You can say, well, this one has, is apparently collecting or storing data quite long, and this one isn't. So without judging ourselves, we leave the judging up to the consumer or the end user. We then make a decision on, hey, this label looks more attractive to me than that label, so I'm going to choose for that one. Mm-hmm. And I don't know how it works for you, but for me, when I go to the supermarket, once in a while, I will actually look at the ingredient list of things. I'll just be in a mood and I'll be like, oh, I'm going to compare these things and see, oh, from now on, I'll choose this one instead of that one because I remember that. And I think this also should hopefully help people do that. And of course, once a lot of organizations are creating labels like this and make those, and those are machine readable, then of course, third parties could create services on top of all this to compare things and to more judging, according to their own standards. But that's not our goal right now. We want to be the neutral party, just helping people inform and educate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. There's another comment also in the chat saying first that it's a very cool approach and also addressing the need for of the people that many have wanted. So well done. How do you foresee enforcement in future other than through a legal GDPR process? So which organization would monitor ongoing honesty of the label versus actual so users will actually trust it? Do you foresee any audits, voluntary or so forth?
Yeah, that's a really a good question. I think that is well, he said other than through legal GDPR process. So we could imagine, of course, this whole project was a reaction to the GDPR itself, where it said, hey, we need icons. We need something in the future that will help people communicate things. So we would be open to making this a standard in the long run. I mean, that would be interesting, right? But we want to start out with just voluntary acceptance. But yeah, it's a question. And I think what you mentioned there is an interesting idea to make some kind of like with Twitter, where like this is an audited label. Yeah, that's possible. But yeah, that's difficult to say. And also, I'm not sure if a lot of these things. Yeah, it's complicated. I think right now we're just trying to accept that we hope that people will want to be honest. And also, it's supposed to be a summary of your privacy policy. So if you put things in a label that are totally different than what's in your privacy policy, I hope that some eagle-eyed viewers will say, hey, this is not the same as what you wrote down there. So in that sense, it's not I think really amenable to lying a lot. I think that would be a smart move.
Mm. All right. Is there any other questions or comments directly to Tijmen and about the privacy label?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I was just wondering whether you are connected somehow with terms of service didn't read, which is like a platform that does something, I mean, not very similar, but on the same direction. I'm sure you know about them, and if you're connected with them, and if you are foreseeing like any, I don't know, further connection with them.
No, not really, because they were actually in the icon list I showed at the beginning, but they're one of those organizations that is trying to summarize it into one icon, totally whoop down into one icon. And I think that's really valuable and really great. But we wanted to do more than that. Like we said, we realized we didn't want an icon. We wanted a label, something that had more knowledge in it, more information in it, so that people can actually don't have to just trust another organization, but can get a little bit informed, read a little bit about what is going on, and then make their own decision a bit more. So yeah, it's really great, and we're totally open to people doing that, but we want it to be a little bit more complex.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
All right. I would then also invite Estelle back to the discussion and open this more up for the design, more generally. And there was a comment or question in the Zoom chat that I think we could start from, which was, is there a designer's code of conduct? Probably also for, doing the design for different services and interfaces. So
there are many. Yes, there are a lot of these code of conduct. I'm just jumping in here, but I remember Marcel Schouwnaar and his people made one a few years ago, which was, what was it called? There are many. So I wrote a book about privacy design, and I put a lot of them in there. There are a lot of people who make these, declarations of principle, and so there are a lot of those. Yeah.
And what do you think of those, and especially that there are so many?
They're great, but so like I said, one of the reasons why I started making that the smart home project was because my students told me, all these principles are great, but they're not really easy to implement in practice, right? We need examples. We want it to be more outspoken and clear in practice, and that I think that's a valid thing. Where the risk with principles is always that they use these hooray words, like transparency, and that doesn't really say anything, right? You have to be more clear, like whose transparency, like transparency of the citizen or of the people in power, without being more clear and precise. Often you don't really say much at all. So that's why I like this idea of also adding examples. So the book that I wrote was 8 principles of privacy design, which were already very pragmatic, but even then I realized we had to make it more concrete.
Does Estelle have something to add to that?
Well, actually, that's true that there are a lot of principles and lists and that kind of things, but then it's still different from what you have in other disciplines, such as medicine or lawyers. They really have binding vows to take when they begin to do their job as a doctor, as a lawyer, or whatsoever. And to my knowledge, I don't think we have anything close to this in design. But then the question is it desirable or not, etc. I'm not totally sure. So I think it's an open question. And if we want to create those kind of standards, we need to think why exactly, what do we try to achieve through this kind of means, basically? That's it.
Right. There was actually a question also to Estelle about, are you developing a GDPR chatbot or just design approaches?
Well, actually, it's just designing approaches. So I'm not sure what does it mean, GDPR chatbot, to be honest. So basically, in the examples I showed, we used a chatbot because it's an interface that is becoming quite trendy. And so we thought that it could be interesting to kind of explore what could be done with this kind of interface, but it's not really, developed so far. And so maybe at some point we will do some kind of workshop on this very, very particular kind of interface. But we are not creating a GDPR chatbot per se.
Right.
Can I add some? We asked about principles, so I just got the colophon from the book, or the bibliography. So the one I was mentioning was the Internet of Things manifesto. Was one of those manifestos or principle things that was quite popular for a while. I think the the Canadian privacy officer made these 7 privacy by design principles, which were also quite popular for a long time. There's the critical engineering manifesto. Let's see if there's another one in there, but there's a couple of those, that were, pop up from time to time.
Great, thank you for sharing those.
This might also be fun. This is together with the designer, I developed an initial example of what an oath could look like for privacy designers. I don't know if you can read that, but that's in the same vein as what doctors do. So there's also been, but this is not the first one to do that. Also, there have been a lot of initiatives to develop one of those, and they're very fun.
Great. All right. Any other questions, comments about this talk? Then I would ask you one, and I think this actually comes up or derives from a comment that Tijmen you made that once in a while you're in a shop and you are in a mood to actually start looking through the ingredients list and so forth. There are people who are interested in and looking through and trying to make sense of those terms and conditions, privacy policies, and so forth. And there are others who just either are ignorant or don't see the value in going through all of this. So what are your thoughts on this, that this interfaces, these privacy labels, these different approaches are actually also the tool for raising data literacy and taking this people into the mood of taking care of this more?
I don't think they are. I don't think what is going to get people into the mood is all the scandals. So I often compare it to oil. Like data is a new oil is like the best. We used to call it data is new gold. Now we say data is a new oil, and that's brilliant because it is. It has a lot of good sides. It has a lot of downsides, and with oil you understand that. So I often say, well, compared to how we got awareness around climate change, that took 80 years, right? Like the first. Scientists in 1930 said, hey, this is maybe doing something. And then 1967, we got the Club of Rome report. And so slowly people gained awareness. And of course, like 10 years ago, buying biological food at the supermarket was almost impossible, or 20 years ago. And right now, it's everywhere. So you see this climate awareness and that didn't help. That was helped, of course, by activists saying, hey, you should care about this. But it also just right now is really being helped by the temperature going up and crazy weather effects and people just feeling it and experiencing it. And I think the fun thing about the IoT world, especially, and the privacy world, is that people are really starting to see it, the problems. And so I hope that the whole awareness growth will go a lot faster than it did with oil. But I think a lot of it will come just from people that starting to see the issues, right? Starting to read about scandals. And then, of course, it's up to us to be ready with better solutions. And I think this is very much like how I see it, and also with Candle, this is very much like the climate change thing, where there's a growing market for these things as well. Right? So it is not just activists who have to do it. There is a growing market. So I've literally yesterday sat with a possible investor who was saying, well, yeah, this is a growth market. This is great. This is something that's happening now. So we don't have to do this alone anymore.
What are your thoughts on this, Estelle?
Actually, I think that's, well, so basically I think one particular point with data, I think there is a real problem that it is focused on the individual, and it doesn't connect to the individual within a community. And this kind of super personalized, it's an issue that you are kind of confronted to it in a very, I would say, alone way as an individual. And so some people are, as you said, quite literate about it and will address it, and a lot of others won't do anything because they feel like they're alone against the world somehow. So maybe something that would be interesting would be also to try to bring back some kind of collective mindset behind data. And I think at the last MyData conference, there were one former Uber driver that kind of created a syndicate, I guess. I don't know, I don't remember his name right now, I'm sorry. But basically, what he has done is create for all the people who are working for Uber Drive, Deliveroo, all those data workers somehow, a way to form a new kind of collective and to act collectively on the data. And by doing that, they also gain this wish to understand the data systems, how that data are used, etc., etc. And so maybe for our design and designers, we should try to push more, to try to, through interfaces or whatsoever, to kind of make the collective reality of data more visible, so that people can use it and be empowered through it somehow. Maybe I'm a bit out of the question, but yeah.
Okay, that's nevertheless, yeah. I would also just give the chance, maybe somebody in the audience have also their thoughts to share about this question.
Otherwise, I have a question.
All right.
Well, this is more of something that I've noticed a lot recently, and that I actually would like, what would be interested in your opinion, which is, as I mentioned in my presentation, I think it's very important in the public debate to make the distinction between, you know, the provided data, the observed data, the derived data, and the inferred data. And I think right now there's a lot of initiatives really meaning well, which are about this narrative, which is, well, you have to own your data and then you can profit from it yourself. You know, like Jaron Lanier saying things like this. And I must admit, I'm a bit taken aback by those, because on one hand, they accept the narrative that data is just something that's valuable, which is that you exude and that you can profit from. I think it's it's priceless in my. But I also worry that in a lot of these initiatives, I see I don't see the distinction between my data and your data, right? So what these data brokers will say is that we have your raw data, and then we throw it into an algorithm, and then we generate these scores. And these scores are no longer your data. They are our data. They are our algorithmically generated opinion about you. Right? So especially in America, this is what they say is, well, you know, this is protected by the freedom of speech of our company. Right? So our opinion about you, you can't even say anything about. You can't touch it because that's just our opinion. Right? That's free speech. In Europe, in theory, data brokers are not allowed to say that, but I've been in panels with a director of data brokers where they actually say that as well. So to my surprise. Anyway, so the point is that this narrative of that data ownership is the solution to this problem is, for me, worrisome, because I rarely see that these initiatives point out that they understand this difference between your data and their data. And I wonder how you feel about this issue. How anyone feels about this issue.
Well, I can speak to that. I think you're definitely onto something, and the way I would address it is, it's not about the data at all. And this is also a comment indirectly on your choice of not being judgmental. It's much easier to explain the privacy issues in terms of who is learning, who is benefiting from access to data about you. Because once you start tracking who is getting the benefit, not in terms of money, not money to you at all, not in those terms, but in terms of what community of people, or is it your family? Is it you that's benefiting? Is it a community that you choose? Is it the vendor? Then it's much easier to, in other words, I think we're not being nearly adversarial enough and not nearly judgmental enough to tame this monster.
No problem. Just a quick one on the inferred data. I said on the contract for the web debates, that just concluded, and the whole debate around inferred data, as you said, was quite a big debate, because it was, is that included in rights portability, for example? And under GDPR, it's strictly not, if consent given for the data that insights are inferred from. So a lot of it was how much data belongs to the organization because they've used their IP to infer data, or either from observed behavior or whichever. The biggest question there was around, was true consent given, or was there a true legitimate interest for them to gain these insights? And I think the layperson does not understand that. It's just this whole us versus them type of concept, which I don't think is fair either. So the question you pose is much harder to explain to individuals than, it's my data, which it's not, because the company spends, in the medical world or in media world, a lot of money to understand how to look at your data in a different lens and offer you a lot of the time very cool services, and that is their insight. So it was a long debate actually on that contract for the web panel, which they released now some approaches to it. There's also another code of conduct which is being released soon. But yeah, it's not an easy answer to your question. And I've posted a link just to stimulate argument on why data is not oil in the commentary, mainly because of the confusion on fungible versus non-fungible type of assets, and also giving consumers the wrong impression that you've got an asset which is worth dollars. It's not worth dollars, it's worth something more important than dollars. So interesting debates. Cool, thank you for the session. My first MyData call, and quite cool. Thank you.
Awesome, thank you for joining, and thank you for sharing the link. Something that I would just add to that data ownership discussion, it's like already mentioned from previous speakers, that it's very complex. And it's at the same time also a very appealing idea in the sense of people feeling some ownership, at least, like, of course it's my data because it's about me. While when we start tying this to things like property or property rights, then it becomes also very difficult, as it's not only about like the organizations and the individuals, but also even between the different individuals, talking about group privacy and our data altogether. So it's of course very difficult, and perhaps more useful discussion would be about rights to that, to access to that data, and then use it in a way. I would then encourage continuing this discussion also either in our MyData Global Slack or elsewhere, or also we could take data ownership as its own topic in one of the webinars. I see the time is running up, so I would just open this up for any last comments or questions to Estelle and Tijmen about design, more focusly on design. Any last comments or questions? If not, then big thank yous for Regis, Estelle, and Tijmen for your interesting presentations and for your work, and everybody here for joining this call today. I definitely encourage you to also join MyData Global Slack workspace for continuing the discussion on the topic. And there is also a specific design channel for more focused discussions on design-related matters. I also want to say that these webinars are recurring, and we try to organize those every second and fourth Friday of the month. So go and check out our website for the schedule at mydata.org/webinars. And I wish you a great day. What's left from this Friday. Have a great weekend, and let's stay in touch.